I wanted to talk about a little bit on the so-called variants that I'm sure everybody's hearing about, and talk about a little bit about what they are and what it may mean in terms of the pandemic and the vaccine effort. So in terms of variants, first understand that mutating is what viruses do. They when they make copies of themselves, they don't do it perfectly every time. They're mistake prone, and COVID-19 actually mutates at kind of a slow pace. Like if you compared it to the flu, um, we don't see that many naturally occurring mutations happen that quickly, but it does, mutate over time. So what can happen? Well, if somehow it stumbles, sometimes it mutates in a way that makes it inactivated. Sometimes it'll mutate in a way that gives it some sort of survival advantage. And that's the thing we have to be a little bit concerned about. And also, if you think from a Darwinian sense, if it mutates in a way that kind of makes it stronger, if you will, then that variant can become more predominant in terms of what we find in the community. An example, with HIV, the virus, HIV virus kind of wants to be its natural original self that we call wild type because that's its most efficient. It can make copies of itself the best, the fastest. But if you start someone on medications and let's say they're not taking them every day, missing a little bit here and there, and we're not having enough medication on board to really suppress the virus can continue to replicate in the presence of those drugs. And it's not like it's figuring out how to be resistant, but it just naturally mutates. And if one of those virus mutates in a way that's resistant to the medication, that will become the dominant one, right? Because it's the law of the jungle. That's the one that can escape the medication. And a similar thing can happen with COVID-19. Some of what we've seen may be in people who are on immune suppressive drugs, such as after transplants, where those folks may be chronically infected with COVID, where the infection can last longer. And there's kind of more of a time for the virus to mutate in that environment and kind of fight off the immune response that patient's body is making. And again, if it stumbles onto a mutation that's more fit and can be stronger, that's how they can sometimes propagate. Not all variants are of concern. There's variants of interest, and that may be just something that a scientist they sequence and they say, looks different than the original coronavirus, but we don't know what it means. If it is cropping up in a lot of different places, then it may be put into the category of a variant under investigation where we really want to learn more about it. And then the variants of concern are ones that we've really identified as variants that might have some sort of advantage. They may be transmitted more efficiently, they may cause more serious infection, they may be evading some of the treatments that we have. So those become variants of concern. And there aren't that many of those, fortunately, at the moment. Why are some of the variants increasing? Part of it is those sort of advantages that we just talked about, where a variant that can evade our natural immune response or some of the treatments might become more dominant. But it could also be sometimes where there's a random variant. It's not particularly worse than any other coronavirus, but maybe that seeds at a super spreader event. And so you see a lot of cases of this one variant, and it's not any worse than the original coronavirus, but it suddenly sort of looks like it's becoming dominant, but it may not be so significant. But it's definitely worth investigating. And sometimes if a variant gets into a community that's not had any previous immunity or any vaccination and it spreads, it'll look like it's becoming dominant, but it just happens to be sort of that founder effect, where it's the first one in the community. This just came out from the Department of Health, and there's really kind of 4 variants right now people are talking about. The so-called B.1.1.7 variant, also known as the UK variant, does seem to be um, a little bit more likely to be transmitted. Um, and we have seen it here in New York, but not a lot of it, and also around the country. It has become pretty dominant in the United Kingdom. And in addition to transmitting a little more easily, it may also cause slightly more serious disease. Um, the B.1.351 variant is also known as the South African variant. That also has an increase in transmissibility. And to caveat this, a lot of what we know is really from sort of these test tube experiments I'll talk about, but it seems like the South African variant may be able to kind of escape the vaccines a little bit more than some of the other variants. We've had 2 detections of those variants in New York, but it's not super common at the moment. The P1 variant is a Brazilian variant. We don't know a lot about it. One concern is that in a city called Manaus in the Amazon in Brazil, they got hit very, very heavily last year in the beginning of the pandemic. And it was sort of thought that they might have herd immunity in that city because so many people have been infected. But they got hit pretty hard again this year. And that may be unfortunate because the Brazilian variant might be able to reinfect. But we really don't know yet. One variant that has been found recently in New York, which is called B.1.526. It sort of started in the Washington Heights area around Columbia University, and it's becoming a little more predominant, but we just don't know a lot about it. It does seem to not respond as well to the monoclonal antibodies that we have for treatment, although it's really hard to know the significance of that since those don't work in a dramatic way. They give you a little bit of an edge. So it's a little bit concerning, but nothing to be too alarmed about at the moment. So one of the most famous things that the virologists like to use is that the virus can't mutate if it can't replicate. And what that means is that if we can shut it down, we're not going to have these mutations and these potentially worrisome variants cropping up. And so that means that getting this vaccine out as quickly as possible is super important. So the example again in HIV, we want to have someone on medications that completely shut down their HIV replication. If the virus isn't replicating, those medicines essentially will work forever because you can't develop resistance. So what it also means is that, as we hear over and over ad nauseum, we have to keep doing all the things that we're doing for now until we get vaccinated to avoid any kind of spread. And the question, should be worried about these variants. We need to be careful. We really don't know enough about any of them to say definitively that they're, super concerning. As I mentioned, most of what we know is sort of in a test tube. I'll talk a little bit more about what we learned about the South African variant, with the J&J vaccine. But, the immune response is complicated, and we definitely do know that it's not only antibodies that are important in terms of responding to COVID-19. There's also a very important arm of the immune system that's driven by T cell response. That's very important. And these studies where you're saying, let's take this variant and we'll throw in these monoclonal antibodies, and it doesn't seem to work quite as well as the wild type coronavirus 19. That doesn't really account for T cell response. And the same thing is true in folks who've had COVID-19. And initially, maybe they have some antibodies that we can measure in their bloodstream. And then 4 or 5 months later, it's like, those antibodies are gone now. Well, that's kind of a natural thing. The antibodies can decrease with time. But if they're re-exposed, those antibodies may come back very quickly, and you may get a very strong T cell response. So there's really, just to say that we can't jump to conclusions about what's going to happen in terms of the vaccine and reinfections with these variants. Interestingly, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was a study that started a little bit late, and one of the sites was in South Africa. And at the time of the study, the dominant strain was that South African variant I just talked about. And although the vaccine was a little bit less effective at preventing overall infections relative to other areas of the world, it was still 100% effective in South Africa at preventing death from coronavirus 19. So that's super important. When we say a vaccine's a little bit less effective, it just means that there may have been more cases, but it was really excellent, even against the variants, of preventing serious infections. And in terms of dealing with the variants, there's a lot of studies that have already started. For instance, possibly giving a third dose of an mRNA vaccine, or tweaking the vaccines to deal with these variants. So there's a lot of work going on that, and nothing that we have to worry too much about right now in New York. As you all know, the two that we've had over the last couple months are the two mRNA vaccines, both 2 shots, either 28 or 21 days apart. In the studies, they were over 95% effective at preventing symptomatic infections. And the definitions in some of these studies were a little bit different, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it's important that some of these numbers taken out of context aren't, maybe apples to oranges. But basically, they were very, very effective at preventing symptomatic disease. Both of those need cold storage, although they're looking at ways that they can be kept in the fridge for a month or a couple of weeks in the case of Pfizer. And as everybody knows, Johnson & Johnson, which is a slightly different kind of vaccine, it's called a viral vector vaccine. They take an inactivated adenovirus, which is a common cold virus, and they kind of load it up with the spike protein, and it works in a way that's similar to the mRNA vaccines in that it just has a different delivery system, but it's actually pretty similar in the ultimate way that it works. And it starts giving you protection pretty quickly, but the best, strongest protection is 28 days after the shot, and it's only 1 shot. There's no booster shot, although they're studying a booster shot. And in the United States, it was about 85%. So you go, oh, I'd rather have the RNA vaccine. Not necessarily. 85% is super good. And as I mentioned, there were different definitions. They had kind of a more stringent definition of what disease was in the J&J vaccine. So it's a little bit apples to oranges. And I would say they're in the real world, they're all three going to be pretty equivalent. Probably the next vaccine that we'll see here is by a company called Novavax, which also is a slightly different way. It'll be 2 doses, but it'll also be able to just be stored in the fridge. But that won't be for a little while. Just highlighting 4 vaccines that are kind of out there. AstraZeneca is mostly being used overseas. And you can see on the 3rd line down, those numbers I mentioned. Johnson & Johnson overall was, quote, only 66%. That was including, South Africa and areas of the world where it didn't do quite as well, even though it was 85% in the US. But look at that, what I highlighted in green. All of them, 100% prevented hospitalization and death. So that's the thing to really keep in mind, even in areas where these variants were circulating. So this is really good news. These vaccines are pretty astonishing in terms of how well they work relative to other vaccines we've developed over the years. So are they safe and do they work? I hopefully convinced you that they work. They, as we mentioned, are very all effective at preventing serious illness and death. We're not 100% sure yet how well they will prevent transmission. Okay, so I get vaccinated, but maybe I go out there and I can still catch the virus, and maybe I don't even get sick. So I'm one of these asymptomatic infections. I could then pass it along to someone. So that's really important. You know, there aren't that many vaccines. There are some that create what we call sterilizing immunity. You get the vaccine and then you literally can't get the disease. Okay. Because the goal really is to keep you healthy, even if you do get the disease. But we can say pretty much with 100% certainty that transmission will be decreased. We just don't know by how much. It might be pretty significant, and some of those studies are just coming out. So not only will you protect yourself, but it's highly likely that you'll be protecting others around you. And they're super safe. There was a lot of concern, and a lot of attention paid in the very, very early days, the first week or so, every dose was being tracked. And, there were some cases of anaphylaxis. But as we've gone along, it's starting to look like it's pretty much the same as what we see with lots of other vaccines, in the range of 2 to 4 per million patients getting anaphylaxis. No one has died, so far in terms of vaccine side effects. So they're very safe. These are the latest numbers. We had sort of dropped in terms of how much testing we were doing in the country. That's picking up again. You can see cases have dropped dramatically from that post-holiday surge. That could be just because the holidays are over and people started being careful again, but it also may have some component of the vaccine in there. Hospitalizations and deaths have also dropped quite significantly. Biden's invoking the Defense Production Act and getting Merck to help Johnson and Johnson produce their vaccine. Merck, has been making vaccines for, a million years, and they're very good at it. So they're going to start helping produce that. So that's going to be fantastic, especially because it's one dose. In New York, we're not doing quite as well as we could in vaccinating folks of color. In that 65 and older, we're about 44% white. You can see the numbers for Asian, Latino, and Black. And those numbers are lower than what the percentage of the population. If New York City is 22% Black, we should be at least at 22% in terms of vaccinations, and we're not. So there's work to be done on that front. 575,000 have been partially vaccinated, and 685,000, so a little over a million, fully vaccinated. So that's pretty good in terms of getting things rolled out. LA was really hit super hard, over the fall and into the holidays. But basically, this is symptom onset in COVID-19 positive healthcare workers. A simple graph just showing, how many healthcare workers and when they were getting symptoms. And believe it or not, right now, it's actually lower than it was at any time last year. And they really believe that that's from the vaccine. You see that steep drop off. January, late December, January, everyone started getting vaccinated in terms of first responders. So that's good news. And this is really super dramatic to me. This gray line is the graph of COVID deaths in the United States overall. And this red line or orange line, pink line is deaths in nursing home residents. And as you guys know, the nursing homes were a priority around the country in that first wave of vaccinations. And so really you can see the only explanation for that drop in deaths in nursing homes really has to be the vaccine. So that's pretty dramatic in terms of how effective the vaccine has been. A lot of the patients I'm talking to have some questions, but particularly for folks of color, there is a pretty awful history in the United States of all kinds of discrimination and studies going back to, even the 1800s, where surgical techniques were first practiced on enslaved folks. Um, the Tuskegee, where our United States government, um, followed folks over time to essentially see what the natural history of untreated syphilis was. And that study started before the invention of penicillin, but it continued after that. It's it's just even hard to believe in this day and age that kind of a decision would be made. But getting up into the 50s and 60s and 70s, there have been reports of awful skin studies that have been done on incarcerated folks, and um, so this kind of thing has gone on, and that really has contributed to some of the hesitancy. One of the key scientists who developed the vaccine is African American. The structure of the system is such that we have a lot of faces who look like me who are trying to persuade people that these things are safe. And I think I've built up credibility over my 30 years in practice with my patient population, and continue to be discrimination in terms of access to healthcare. But I think we need to do a better job, with education and getting out into communities. And I hope that we start, um, you know, getting into folks' homes for the disabled and the homebound. And folks feel like, as I mentioned, gee, it happened so fast. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, the previous record for a vaccine was 4 years, but that was like 50, 60 years ago. One of the reasons the RNA vaccines came quickly is because they've been working on that as a technique for 10 years. There have been lots and lots of studies with people getting these RNA vaccines for the original SARS, for MERS, for Zika. It's just that those diseases died down before they actually really had the need to get a vaccine on the market. But there have been a lot of studies. And then what was different about this was, this was a pandemic. And so basically, in a lot of cases, the government incentivized these companies. Normally, a company would do their research, they'd start a trial. If there wasn't a lot of disease around, it might take 2 or 3 years to have enough cases of the disease to prove that it worked. With COVID, we had so much disease happening that really shortened the time that we needed for a trial. And so that's a huge reason it was developed so quickly. And then, as I said, what happened was the government said, we'll guarantee that we're going to buy 100 million doses. Here's the money. Start making it now. Okay. Even if it doesn't work, we want you to start making it now. And of course, in normal times, a company wouldn't do that. They'd wait, they'd do the studies, they'd get it approved, then they would start making it. And all that would take time. Um, so it was quickly, but it was for a lot of those reasons. There was actually criticism, for instance, with Johnson and Johnson, that it was too slow. And the reason for that is because they did the same process that they would do approving any vaccine, and they took their time and they read the hundreds of pages, literally thousands of pages of studies. They met, they talked. It was a unanimous approval. It's as good as it can get, and it's our key to getting back to some semblance of the life where we can hang out. And of course, the vaccine has been politicized. And there's a lot of stuff out on social media about decreasing fertility or, these bad outcomes or various conspiracy theories. But, really none of that is true. But it's okay to have some concerns about it. But we're 50 million doses in now, and folks have been doing pretty darn well. Every single vaccination I ever made, in rare cases can have side effects. And also don't forget, in a country where we're vaccinating literally millions, and getting up to over 1 million a day, out of that group of people, um, some of those folks were going to get sick from something else. or we're going to be diagnosed with cancer the next week, or we're going to die or have a stroke or something. It's just out of the universe saying, it was their time. And, when that happens close to a vaccine, it may just be coincidental, but sometimes that can be associated. And that's where it's important for us to really look um, at the background expectation of these events happening, and to see if it's more or less. So far, with 50 million doses given, things look very safe. I mean, that's not long term, but certainly in the short term, they look very safe. And most of the side effects you'd expect to see from a vaccine would be really in the short term. I thought this was a little bit interesting. Over time, starting in December, all groups have started to become more willing to get the vaccine. But interestingly, white Republicans are the folks that are most resistant. White Democrats are the most accepting, and here's Black and Latino here in the middle, having gone from around 60% down to 30%. But the white Republicans are still, and that's just clear social media politicization and conspiracy theories. But we need to really be open to people who have doubts and answer questions honestly, and and show the data in terms of safety. The short answer is that it's not recommended right now, but there are actually some studies looking at that. Some of the adenovirus vaccines, like the AstraZeneca, like some of the Russian and Chinese vaccines, it may actually make sense for some of those because the adenovirus is sometimes used to help boost the immune response. And if you use the same adenovirus booster for your second shot, it might actually be blunted because you've developed antibodies against that adenovirus, and so you might not get a strong response. So they're actually looking at maybe some of the adenoviruses, adenovirus 26, some are adenovirus 5, mixing and matching those to maybe get a stronger response. The RNA vaccines, all the vaccines give you some protection just with one shot. Definitely 2 shots is better for those. Probably in a pinch, if you got Pfizer number one and there was nothing else and there wasn't going to be anything else, it would probably be fine to get the Moderna. But right now, we're not recommending that because they're so similar. There's some very, very subtle differences. So again, right now, try not to do that, but there are some studies ongoing looking at different strategies.
It's unclear at this point, right, whether we'll need to get vaccinated every year.
It's unclear. My guess is probably.
Mhm.
Maybe not every year, maybe every couple of years,
Okay.
but we really don't know. Partly dependent on the variants, in which case maybe we need a booster or actually a different vaccine, and partly that we just don't really know how long the immunity will last from the current vaccines. But we'll learn that as we go along.
After having both doses of the vaccine, does that change your ability to travel?
In terms of traveling within the United States, right, there haven't really been any restrictions. So I think that one could absolutely feel more comfortable about travel. What they're going to come out with probably any day now from the CDC are going to be recommendations about like vaccinated people hanging out together, guidelines for that. Okay. Um, there's still going to be some caution about vaccinated people hanging out with unvaccinated people, mostly for the protection of the unvaccinated. Just because I'm vaccinated doesn't mean I might not get a case that I wasn't aware of and be able to spread it to someone who's not vaccinated. And so part of being careful, even once you've been vaccinated, is really taking care of the people around you that haven't been. You're probably in good shape, but we want to continue to take care of the folks that haven't been vaccinated until they can get their shots. So there are studies ongoing for children under 18, under 16.
Mhm.
Hopefully, we'll have some data on that over the next 2 or 3 months. The disease severity is much, much less in young
Hmm.
kids, but there are these rare cases of, an inflammatory state that have been fairly serious. And so getting kids vaccinated is going to be super important. Sometimes we're like, hey, that was too fast. Now we're kind of like, hey, how about some data on the kids? But it has to be done, with appropriate studies. As pediatricians always say, kids are not just small adults; they're different. Their immune systems are different. We really need to do the studies to make sure it's safe for them as well.
When you do get your vaccine, you do get an official CDC vaccination card. Do not share that. I mean, make a copy maybe for your own records, but do not share it with other people. That's like the gold card to be able to travel. Maybe you'll need it for work or whatever to prove that you've been vaccinated. I've been told by family members that um, there's a lot of counterfeiting going on with
Oh God,
vaccination cards.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh, of course.
So yeah, so
that's messed up.
um it's kind of disturbing, but it doesn't surprise me. So keep it in a safe place. I know with all the vaccine study that they've been doing with the COVID, I did hear about an HIV vaccine as kind of something that's coming out of it. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, no, I did see that. Probably similar article that this RNA vaccine for COVID, because it's actually relatively easy to make. A little hard to store because it's not that stable, but relatively easy to make. This is sort of proof of concept that it can work. And so they are looking at an HIV vaccine, in terms of this platform, the RNA platform, as well as, there's a virus called Nipah virus, which, in the world can cause problems, and very importantly, malaria virus. All the vaccines that are being developed for coronavirus now pretty much use the spike protein, which is the part of the protein that latches onto your cells. And that's the one that mutates. And so they're probably also going to look at vaccines that use other parts of the coronavirus that don't mutate as much, so that we might eventually, over a year or two, have a vaccine that has more broadly protective against all the viruses. They're also working on that for the flu, so that we could maybe get one flu vaccine every 5 years. So these are exciting things that may come down the pike. If you have any of these conditions, getting coronavirus is not a good thing. We know that. But the vaccine, it's going to be a 1 day of a sore arm and maybe a little fever, but none of these conditions make the vaccine any riskier. Okay, it's just the same as if you didn't have any of these conditions. And so we really highly recommend folks that do have these comorbidities get the vaccine for their protection.
After you get vaccinated, do you need to get tested anymore?
No,
There you
you
go.
don't. I mean, there's no reason to test to see if it worked or anything like
Hmm.
that, or check for antibodies, et cetera, et cetera. Having said that, in the first 4 to 6 weeks, there are definitely people who get the vaccine on day one, and on day 5 they develop COVID symptoms because they'd already gotten it before they got the vaccine. Or in that first 28-day period, you don't have the full protection. So definitely in the first couple months, if you have symptoms consistent with COVID, go get tested for COVID. We're all going to have to kind of figure it out as time goes on. I think for folks that are vaccinated, if you develop mild symptoms of something, I don't think you need to run out and get tested. But it may be important if you're going to be around unvaccinated folks, or you have kids that haven't been vaccinated. So there's still going to be some degree of testing, but you're going to be a lot less likely to have symptomatic disease once you're vaccinated.
Keep doing what you're doing. Keep wearing your mask. Keep social distancing.
Essentially been no flu this year.
That's so interesting.
And, most people feel that probably because we're all wearing masks and being careful. And, it just goes to show there's, anywhere from 15 to 50,000 or more in a bad year of flu deaths. So, maybe we all want to wear masks during flu season and be kind to each other.